If you are here and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. Here's the thing. How could you possibly know what nobody has ever taught you? Like literally, there's nothing wrong with you. Do a resentment inventory. Because usually where you're holding on to resentment for others, either a boundary has been crossed or you need a boundary, but you have not expressed a boundary. So, when people are like, I'm very confused, because it can be confusing. The whole concept of boundaries, I feel like there's a million myths out there, so much misunderstanding about it, thinking that to have good boundaries, to be a boundary boss, you have to be mean and rejecting and all of this stuff that is not true, because then the book would have been called Boundary Bully, not Boundary Boss, because a boss is actually masterful. So the first place that people can start is to really look at how they feel. Dial in, like, who are you holding resentment towards? And then look at why.
Okay, so to get really practical with this, is the person actually taking time and writing this down? And does it happen like just in one sitting or over a period of time?
Well, what ends up happening, and the way that I teach everything that I teach is through a process of awareness raising, right? So there's 5 pillars of self-transformation, self-mastery that I created. And the first one is self-awareness. So I don't want to minimize how important that is and how much of the time we are not self-aware. We are on autopilot. We are reacting. We are coming from a very ingrained behavior place. So what I'm really asking people to do is to pause. You just can't be on automatic pilot. My partner says this, I do this, I walk out, I slam the door, then we make up, like thinking about how you feel, dialing in, because so much of the time, just when I ask clients, like especially new clients in therapy, okay, well, what brings you joy? Let's just say simple. 8 times out of 10, maybe 9, they go, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, that would be a good thing to know, because so much of the time, especially if you've been raised as a woman, not that boundary disorders don't, affect men, they do, but we're just focused outward. We're like, does everyone else have what they need? How were we raised? Because so much of this has to do with that. And most women were raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. The more self-sacrificing you are, the more loving you are.
Let's take some time and go into this self assessment piece a little bit more because I think this is a new concept for people, especially these days, always being connected to the internet, to our smartphones. There's always a distraction there. What would that look like to sit and actually feel the feelings? And then what is it? Because this, again, could be so foreign to people. What is it that they're looking for?
Well, let's make it really simple. So the way that I do it in the book is we start with making a very extensive okay and not okay list, where you're basically going through every aspect of your life: work, relationships, family, friends, health, wellness, money, all of them. And you're really looking at what is working in my life, what is okay, and what is not working in my life, and what would I like to be different, because that people rarely do that unless someone gives you the exercise to actually do it, right? Which I do in the book, where we start, because this is the baseline and it gives people like a GPS to get to what in their life needs their attention. So if you go to your work area in your life and you go, all right, what is working for me? What isn't working for me? Then you go, oh, what isn't working for me is the way I'm communicating with my team. I feel like I'm frustrated on a daily basis about this. Let me think about, why is that? Oh, because my boundaries aren't good, because I wasn't clear. I don't have transparent agreements with them about, don't reach out to me before 11 a.m., about the way, if you reach to me after 7 p.m., I will get to that the next day. I have my alerts off, like giving information so that the people in our lives treat us the way we want to be treated. Because so much of the time we'll say, I mean, everyone should know that. Or like if you were like a normal person, you would know not to contact me after 7 p.m. or whatever. We make this assumption. It's called positive projection, where we assume that like you are like me and I am like you. And it is not true, right? We are all so different and there's nothing wrong with that. But effective communication is the thing that is so important. But we can't effectively communicate, Jesse, until we know what it is that is the problem. What is causing us pain, right? What is the stress or the constriction in our life? So when you do this, it's really an inventory of what's working in your life and what isn't. And it's very specific things where communication with your partner, is the way you're communicating working or not? Even if you don't know how to quote unquote fix it, understanding, just starting the process of being like, oh, okay, these things are working, these things are not. Now I know where to put my attention when it comes to, because so much of the time it has to do with boundaries as to why the things aren't working in your life.
That makes a lot of sense. And when you're working with clients, how often do people realize where that issue is stemming from? Or for most of us, is it not until they do the exercise and stop and think that they really can pinpoint that?
I think it's the latter, in that it is threatening for us. So unconsciously, especially if you don't like confrontation, if you have the disease to please, if you are a people pleaser, which so many of us are, or are that way naturally, or are groomed to be that way, whichever, it can be threatening. So a lot of times it will present as confusion, right? Like I'll have people come into my practice and be like, I'm so torn about my relationship. I mean, on the one hand, the person's great. And on the other hand, here's 8 million reasons why I should not be with them. But in that indecision that I think is unconsciously driven by fear, what is the secondary gain? Oh, I get to stay here and not have a conversation I don't feel equipped to have. I get to keep the status quo. I don't want to rock the boat, because a lot of us were raised. So many of the people in my therapy practice and my courses are really conflict averse. They really feel very, very uncomfortable. So I actually created a very simple quiz that people can take to get their boundary archetype, to give you an idea of like, how are your boundaries disordered? Because really there are archetypes, there's 7 of them. Are you more of a pushover? Are you more of a peacekeeper? Are you more of a chameleon? Because even though those are all porous boundaries, meaning too malleable, they're different, right? They're not actually the same. So if people want to take it, they can just go to boundaryquiz.com. It's free. And that will give you'll also get a video and sort of information about where to start whatever your archetype is.
Let's come back to that example you talked about earlier where maybe somebody's finding that somebody at work is connecting with them after 7 p.m. And at that time, they're with family and they don't want to be bothered. And this goes on for a period of time and they realize this is an area that I need to address. It's stressing me out. It just isn't healthy in the long term. How do we go about, because again, this is going to be so new for so many people. How do we go about addressing that with the person in a healthy way?
Well, if we back it up and you realize, right, you read the book, you listen to this in your life, you need help with boundaries, but you don't know what to do. You can start by really looking at your best practices, because if in your company, and I will get to the actual answer to the actual question, but if in your company or where you work, if you have implied agreements rather than transparent agreements, right? If you make that assumption, like, well, of course, everyone doesn't want to work at 7 p.m., not true, then you are setting yourself and either the people who work for you or the people who you work for or with up to fail. So there's such a very effective way of being like, oh, here are the best practices. This is the best way for you to communicate with me. This is my preferred way. Some people like an email. In my team, we do everything by voice notes because it's my company and that's how I want to communicate. If somebody else doesn't like it, I literally don't care. Not to be mean. I go, hey, get your own company and communicate however you want in that company. So for me, it's minimizing misunderstanding. It's you're actually people's expectation. You're managing expectations and you're clearly communicating your expectations long before someone is contacting you at 7 p.m. because they would have, when they got onboarded to your company, they would have been like, hi, best communication practices with Terri, with Jesse, with whomever. So that's one way to more institutionalize it. But let's just say you have this realization now, and you're like, okay, I need to tell this person to quit calling me after 7 p.m. First of all, you need to look at the rest of where else is this happening, especially if it's a work thing, and get clear about what your preferences are, write them down, communicate them at some point. In a meeting, you can say, hey, I had this thought. You can bring it up. How it would be more effective if we were all on the same page. These are my best working hours. If it's an emergency, you can contact me here after 7 p.m. or whatever. But let's say for that person, maybe you don't have a big company. Maybe it's a small company. Maybe it's just you and that one person. You would say, hey, I'd like to make a simple request that we are done with work calls by 7 p.m. If there's something that comes up and it's not an emergency after 7 p.m., I'll ask you to send me an email about it that I will see in the morning after 11 a.m. when I get to tech, right? When I actually start my day, at least that's when my day starts, usually, except today. That's it. I'd like to make a simple request because here's the thing. What we're doing when we're communicating a boundary request, because what are your boundaries? They're your personal preferences, your limits, and your deal breakers, like your non-negotiables. Those are simply the things that make up your boundaries. And your boundary preferences, like what you like and what you want. Nobody can tell you that your preferences are wrong. We're all so different. So some people may want to work until 2 a.m. because they're a night owl and they sleep until 1 in the afternoon, right? None of that is wrong, especially if it's your company, right? It's really about just communicating that. We make sure that we are sticking to our own side of the street. So we're not using accusatory language. We're not making that person wrong for not being us, basically. And we're able to just say, hey, I'd like to make a simple request. This is my preference, so that we're clear on what to do. If you can work until 3 in the morning. Anything that is not an emergency, do not reach to me until the next day. Or do it and I won't see it because I'm not checking my tech until I start working the next day because I have good work boundaries. And now I'm cluing you in. I'm giving you a chance, right, to do what it is that I need. If the person continues after that, right, you have the boundary conversation, and then like for the next 5 nights, try to get in touch with you at 9 p.m. After the first night, I'd be like, hello. As per our conversation yesterday, were you confused about what we talked about? You will have to reiterate boundaries, though. I mean, we're talking about work stuff, Jess, and that's kind of easy because I don't mean easy, simple, but I mean less emotionally fraught than doing this with our high priority folks. So when I'm teaching this process, I'm always like, hey, start with the low priority people, your hairdresser, the waitress, your mailman, and be more assertive in your preferences and what you want. Because it's so much easier to do it with lower priority folks. I could tell you, though, every person who takes a course with me, reads the book, wants to be like, cannot wait to confront my narcissistic mother. I'm doing it tomorrow. I'm like, okay, you're on page 5. Do not do that tomorrow because you're not ready. And when people ask me, like, tell me what to say, I'm all like, I can. And in the book, I give you hundreds of scripts, I believe. In one chapter is just only scripts about every scenario known to mankind. But here's the thing with language. If you do not understand your downloaded boundary blueprint, why you are specifically relating to boundaries the way that you are, the perfect words won't stick because the change in you has to come from inside. Does that make sense? Like, you can't it's like somebody telling you how to say something fluently in another language, and you can maybe say it once or twice, but you will not be able to have an actual conversation.
I hear what you're saying there. But let's come back to the specific example you gave there when you're actually talking to somebody. And again, this is very general, but I just want to come back to the language part of that because again, this for a lot of people is so new. They might build it up in their head and come up with this big long story and have everything recited to go in and talk to that person at work the next day. So again, it's going to be individual, but we'll use this example for people to, see how it could look and they could build off of this. So, what are some of the nuances when it comes to the language we want to use when we're communicating a boundary with somebody? And we'll stick to the low priority, the low risk of somebody at work, like you mentioned, a good person to start with.
All right, well, let's just talk about the steps in the process. So, I call it creating a proactive boundary success plan so that you do have to think ahead. Because even with that person at work, you know them, you've interacted with them, you know something about their personality, who they are. So, we take those things into consideration when we're approaching someone. If someone is not a morning person at work, they're always really crabby until after they've had 3 cups of coffee. Even if you're the boss, you're probably going to wait until the afternoon to have that conversation because we're setting ourselves up for success. So the first thing is identifying where you need a boundary. And you can do that from your resentment inventory, but also from dial into your body wisdom, right? When something happens, even if you don't say anything at the moment, meaning they're calling me and it's 9 p.m., I get a physical reaction to what I feel like is an intrusion. So your body, I get a constriction. I might get a flash of anger because I'm like, I can't believe they're calling me again. What's wrong with Bob from accounting? Like that, right? So there's 2 ways to sort of get an idea of where you need boundaries. And then you're going to think about setting yourself up for success. Like when would be an optimal time to have this conversation? We're never warning anyone. We're never ever saying, we need to talk, because I want to know if anyone listening to this has ever wanted to talk to anyone in their life when they ominously drop the we need to talk. Nobody wants to. We are making this neutral and pleasant, more neutral, meaning not supercharged, right? No matter how you're going to have anxiety for doing this because it's new behavior. And a lot of times we're afraid to be rejected. We don't want to stir the pot. We don't want to rock the boat, all of those things. So once you figure out when you're going to do it, then you are going to come up with a script, not a monologue, not a novel, a simple script, being very clear about what you're asking the person. And you can always start with a positive. Jess, I think the thing that is really revolutionary for people with this process is that you can always express a boundary request or draw boundaries with kindness if you so choose. You can use more heat if you need to, if it's a repeat offender or a boundary disaster, a boundary destroyer, sure. You can use more heat, but you don't need to. And especially if it's someone who you respect or you care about, you can also start with a positive. I love how ambitious you are. You're still working at 9 p.m. And for me, I'd like to make a simple request that you don't reach to me. You don't even have to give a reason. You can, if you want to provide context, you can say, because for me, I have a real delineation between my work life and my home life. So even though I'm working from home, when 7 p.m. comes, I turn off my computer, I change my clothes, I light some sage, and I get into my actual life or whatever. There's nothing wrong with providing context as long as you're not convincing them or building a case like you're writing a dissertation on why you don't want them to contact you after 7 p.m., which you don't need to do. And when we do that, it's more like we're convincing ourselves we have a right to the boundary. But usually people do not react well to that because they're like, oh, look, she feels insecure about drawing this boundary rather than just simply saying, it's a simple request, because here's the reality. Any request is actually simple. Whether the person's going to do it or not, well, that could get complicated. And then afterwards, you can say, do you have any questions? Or, so we're agreed, right? I always try to get the other person to sort of verbally agree to the thing. So is that cool? Can you not contact me after whatever? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I totally got it. All right. That is a successful boundary request conversation. Now, if they don't do it, you need to, that's someone who comes from being a boundary first timer to a repeat offender. So I don't want to get it too complicated, but I could go on about that if you want me to, but did that answer what you were asking?
That was perfect. I was just looking for a lot of those nuances you gave there for people to go about having that conversation, and especially having to give an answer or not. Making a request and just saying this is what you want versus having an elaborate story afterwards, which is, I think, what a lot of people by default would do. And you're saying it could go either way depending, but don't make it this long drawn out thing.
No, and I think part of it too is that people really do react negatively to that, because I do too. When someone is building a whole case and writing a dissertation on why they don't want to do something, I'm like, so unnecessary. Why? You don't need to build a case. I respect your right to say no. Simply say no. The question is, do you respect your right to say no? And if we feel compelled, because so much of the time, even with my clients, they're like, I feel like I need a really good reason. I'm like, maybe just not wanting to do the thing could be a good reason. I think it's a good reason. And that doesn't mean we don't take into consideration who the person is, how much you love them, how much you want to show up for them. But so much of the pain for my therapy clients that I've seen, it's sort of these ancillary or cursory relationships that seem to cause a lot of the drama in their lives, like the third cousin once removed who thinks that you're best friends and is like devastated that you're not inviting her to your bachelorette party. And your mother's like, just invite Betty. Come on. It's not going to kill you. But if Betty is not one of your VIPs, why are you dialing into Betty's reality that you have a closer relationship than when you do, making the other person's reality more important than your own? There's nothing wrong. You don't have to excommunicate Betty, but she definitely doesn't need to be coming to your bachelorette party in Vegas either.
And where I could see an issue stemming too, if you get into these elaborate explanations, say we'll use an example, somebody wanting to have some things moved into storage, and they ask you, can you come help move on this night, this time? You make up an excuse, no, I have this thing with my family. Then they may send back another response saying, okay, we'll move it to the next day. And then you end up in this big thing where you're back and forth, creating all kinds of conflict that was unnecessary. And you could have just cut it off on the first communication there.
Yes. And with language, like that's a perfect example of where you're able to say, hey, I understand you need help, and right now I actually don't have the bandwidth to do it. I'm really sorry. If I could, I would, but I just can't.
And maybe you could add to that too, I can help you find some movers. And if you have the time, you could do a Google search and maybe look up a couple different movers in the area. And if it's a good friend of yours or a family member that you want to help out, maybe that's a different route.
Yes, but it's also overfunctioning because you know what? Your friend is also capable. They didn't want to hire movers because they didn't want to pay you. So part of it is it's not for you to problem solve. It's for you to stay on your own side of the street. And when you ask somebody to do something and they go, "What about professional movers?" And in your mind you're like, "Hi, like I never thought of that. Thanks. I didn't even know professional movers existed." Do you know what I mean? Where you're like, I was asking you, if you can't do it, I can accept that. The fear though, Jesse, is that it's like we're so afraid of saying no or rejecting someone or not helping someone who says that they need our help, that the fear will drive our behavior. And so much of the time, if we say yes when we really want to say no, think about it. Is that really being nice? It's really giving the people in our life corrupted data about who we are. And then I've had clients come into my, therapy office in their sixth or seventh decade of life, being like, okay, kids are on track, money's in the bank, I kind of like my spouse still, I'm working out 3 times a week. Why do I feel so empty? And I'm like, because your whole life was just checking boxes that other people wanted you to check. And nobody really knows you, right? If you're not telling the truth about even your simple preferences, Women in particular, we've been taught like be easy breezy. You know me, no fuss. It's like a badge of honor to be like, whatever works for you guys is good for me. It's all good. Wow, I hate that saying. I'm like, P.S. No, that isn't life, right? It isn't all good, but it's like this fear of taking up any space in the world. And what we're really doing is depriving the people who love us actual information about us. This is how we negotiate in relationships. My husband goes, "Hey, I really feel like I'm Vietnamese." And I'm like, "I don't. We had it 2 days ago. Can we please have pizza?" I'm like, "Maybe. I don't know. All right. Maybe let's meet in the middle. Let's do Greek." That conversation doesn't happen. If every time my husband wants to do whatever he wants to do, I acquiesce to that and feel resentful. He's so selfish. Is he selfish, or am I not telling him that I don't want to eat that food?
You brought up fear a couple times there. I want to dig deep into this and talk about when it comes to setting boundaries, where does that fear originate?
Well, listen, we are the human species, right? Think about it from a primal point of view. Back in the day, if we were rejected from our tribe, from our crew, which protected us, we could die. So there are really primal reasons why we have fear of social isolation or rejection. And then all the ways that we were taught to not be a troublemaker, be a good girl, be a good boy, don't stir the pot, don't be a drama queen. I mean, I could keep going. There's so many ways that we get these overt and covert messages that we should just sacrifice for others. The more self-sacrificing you are, the better person you are, right? Women in particular, just raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. So I think the fear is so normal. And yet, I think it's time to make a whole different relationship with your fear. We can feel afraid. And unless you're actually in danger, that doesn't have to mean abort the mission, right? You're so much more durable than you think. Humans are so much, you're really not that fragile. But I believe that it's the child within each of us that is afraid of that. It's like we learn these things in childhood. And when we are doing things like appeasing our mail carrier or like doing things we don't want to do for people who are not high priority people, that speaks to something else. That speaks to a child's fear, because grown up you is like, am I really afraid of Phil, my mail carrier? Am I twisting myself up in a pretzel for this acquaintance who thinks I should? Am I taking on their reality instead of my own? So, how do you, back to really your question, is how do we change or shift our relationship with that fear? Well, slowly but surely, when you start having boundary conversations with the lower priority people and you get some positive feedback and you feel different, you feel seen in a way that when we're sort of hiding behind being a yes person, you don't feel seen because you're not being seen accurately, succinctly, authentically. That shifts. And it's like, I can't tell people how that feels. Lots of people who've read the book and taken my courses, they can. But it's like there's nothing better, honestly, in life than being authentically known and accurately seen. Think about how painful it is when you feel misunderstood, when you feel like someone is wrongly putting you in a category. It's so painful. But a lot of times we don't say anything about that. So I think that when we start doing this process, we get a payoff that makes us want to do it more. It's almost like if you're like, I want to get physically fit or I want to lose 10 pounds. In the beginning, you're only like, ugh, all the deprivation. That's all I see. Working out and deprivation. It's going to be terrible. Then you lose 1 or 2 pounds and you go, well, that really wasn't so bad. And actually, I feel good about myself. I'm moving towards a healthier me, which is what I want. I don't know. Was that a good analogy? Does that make sense?
No, that was great. And as somebody who wants to start doing this and setting boundaries again, starting with the lower priority people, how do people tend to react? Because I think it's important we not necessarily try and mold ourselves to make sure they're comfortable, but how do we go about, I guess this would be more with the higher priority people then. Like, say we start to set these boundaries with our partner, with our family, and this is totally new to them, and they're not used to seeing Terry or Jesse stand up for themselves and say what they really want. How how do we go about, you know, making them, if we even should, feel comfortable, or how do we go about handling their reaction to us being different?
Well, first and foremost, let's look at why it matters that you share yourself authentically with important people in your life, and that you don't do a whole bunch of crap that you don't want to do with all the other people in your life and the important people in your life, because it's you not really being yourself. So I think a lot of times people think that the reason why we have boundaries is to manipulate others. Like, it's a lever to control the other person. I want this person to behave this way, so this is what I'm going to do, right? I want the person to not call me after 7 p.m. in that other example. But your healing and your self-confidence and your sense of self-worth comes from having the courage to have honest conversations, to make a boundary request, to prioritize your own preferences, desires, limits, deal breakers. That's where your healing comes from, not from what the other person does. So if you have someone in your life, a sibling, let's just say, you're like, okay, I give into this example in the book. It's a true example of when I lived in the city. So did my sister, one of my sisters, and she had a key to my apartment. And she would just regularly come over when I was at work and just like take things out of my closet and like not say anything about it, right? And then just leave, and I wouldn't know because my closet was a mess, and I wouldn't know until I needed that thing, and then that thing wouldn't be there. And I would be like, "Hi, do you have my thing? Whatever the thing was." "Oh yeah, I do. I do. You know I took it." "No, I did not know." And I finally got to a point, because she didn't care. She just was like, "Yay, your closet is my closet." That I finally got to a point where I had to say, "Listen, if this is the fourth time I've asked you, or the third time, and if you continue to use my key without letting me know, I'm going to take my key back. I don't want to do that. We've always shared clothes, but it seems like a one-way street lately, and I feel really bummed that you're just ignoring what I'm asking of you. It really is hurting my feelings and makes me feel like I can't trust you. Like, why wouldn't you just let me know? I always let you borrow it. It's not that." That's an example of, and she was surprised because I was always more the pushover person who was like, "Whatever, it's not worth it. I don't need to." She was surprised. And yet I didn't have to take back her key, because after that conversation, which was a new kind of conversation, and she was kind of defensive during the conversation. She was like, "I don't know why you're getting so bad. Why are you, it's not a big deal." And instead of reacting to her defensiveness, I was like, "Hey, I'm not saying it's a big deal. I'm saying I have a simple request that if you want to borrow anything from me, you let me know that you're going to use my key and go into my apartment. That is it." And so instead of being like, "I can't believe you think I'm selfish," like reacting emotionally to the person's reaction, we know. And you bring up this good point, like, how are people going to be prepared when we change our boundary dances? Because especially the people you've been dancing with the most and the longest, which is your family of origin, they're like the original dance troupe, they're going to notice that you changed something, that you used to be cool with whatever the thing is, and now you're not. They may say, "I don't even know you anymore. You're changing and I don't like it. I don't think therapy is good for you," or whatever it is that they say. And Dr. Harriet Lerner would call that action a change back move. So it is disrupting the homeostasis or the equilibrium in the relationship for you to do something different, and it feels threatening to the other person. But this is a period of time. If you can stay the course and say, "Hey, I see that you're upset, and yet this is an important boundary for me. So I still must ask you, to respect it. I love you. I don't want to fight with you about this. And this is my request. So there's a way that we can acknowledge that the other person doesn't like what we're doing. And if they get really, sort of aggressive and say, I don't know you anymore, you could say, hey, you do know me, but I'm growing and changing. And it seems like you don't like those changes. But I'm still the same person. I still love you. I value our friendship, or I value our relationship. And I have a simple request about whatever the thing is. So we can't be so thin-skinned that the moment we get pushback, we're like, abort, abort. Okay, forget it. You can come into my apartment whenever you want. Because that would be the old, at least for me, that would be the old response of like lying to myself, saying, it's not even that big of a deal, whatever. And then I'm just accumulating resentment in that really important relationship to me that I don't want to be accumulating.
You mentioned being threatened there when we start to set these boundaries, the other person in the interaction. Let's talk more about why somebody feels threatened, just to understand it from the other person.
Sure. And understand it from you, because this is a human nature thing. This is not just a them thing. Humans, we really like certainty. We really like things to stay the same. We want to know what's happening. So when something changes, like you think about, I always say, fear of success and fear of failure are two sides of the same coin. And the coin is fear of change. And this again goes back to primal times where change, right? If you changed your location, you might now be more vulnerable to predators. Change meant more danger back in the primal days. Now, we're not in the primal days, but we're still wired that way. So feeling afraid of the other person changing, what are we afraid of? Oh, we're afraid that they're going to change and no longer love us, or they're going to change so much that we will lose them. Usually that's the unconscious fear is we don't want to lose the people that we love. And unconsciously we make the connection that if they're changing, we might lose them. So a lot of times if I'm having a boundary conversation and I know the person is feeling threatened, I will reassure them. I will make sure I start with positivity. I so appreciate the time that we spend together. You know how much I value our friendship. And whatever the thing is that I think they're probably not going to like, maybe they will, maybe they won't. But starting it with something that's truthful, right? You're not just blowing smoke, right? If you're going to start it with something positive, it's got to be something that's actually true for you. And also looking at your fear. We've got to look at like evidence, because a lot of times when someone starts to change, we have a really amplified fear. It's really not based in evidence or our past experiences with this person. It's really just a primal, blown out of proportion thing. And because being a boundary boss doesn't just mean having the ability to communicate your own boundary requests, it also means we got to respect the boundary requests of others, or respect the no of others. And if you're someone who has been, a people pleaser, and if you've been an insta or auto yes person, when other people say no to you, wow, I just remember how mad I would get. And I would be like, I cannot believe how selfish Betty is. I mean, I do crap I don't want to do all the time. I can't believe she would just say she doesn't want to do it after everything I've done for her. All the ways I don't want to be in life. Bean counting, thinking people owe me, and all of that had to do with, it wasn't that Betty was doing anything wrong. It was that my boundaries were disordered. And I was like envious unconsciously that Betty could just be like, oh, hey, I'm going to opt out of the dinner with the crew because I don't want to do it because I'm tired, because I don't have money, whatever her reason was, you know?
Coming back to your example there of your sister and the key, how often do you find that setting a small boundary like that, quote unquote small, I mean, it's not necessarily small, but compared to some other things, how often does that, or with clients that you're working with, become a catalyst for a change in so many different areas of that relationship?
Well, it does. That's a great point, because when you can be more honest, because that's what we're talking about. And here's the thing, another thing is that people a lot of times will respond well, right? That's not the reason we do it or don't do it. It's not about us trying to manage their reaction because that's their side of the street. But you would be shocked. I can't tell you how many people have written into me since reading the book, since the book came out, saying, I just can't believe how easy this has become. I'm looking for people to draw boundaries with. Like, it's so exciting. And I'm so surprised at how my partner responded. They were grateful for the information. And of course, you're still going to have people who are like, hey, you used to do everything. And now you're saying you're not going to do everything. And I don't want to do anything. So, yeah, I'm pissed. A lot of times, the people who are the most put off by your boundaries, especially if you're an overgiver and an overfunctioner, you're the one setting limits, right? The giver's got to set limits because the takers rarely do, right? You've seen that meme online. And so a lot of times the person is pissed because you having healthier boundaries, they were benefiting from your disordered boundaries in a way. Like, I knew someone wrote into me, they had grown kids, and the son would drop his dirty laundry off. He was 38 years old. And the mother would do the laundry, have it folded, and he would come, and then she was like, I'm being selfish. Like, I don't want to do his laundry. I was like, no. He could have been doing his laundry at the age of 12, probably, but you could stop now. But then that kid, this is how the mother, the grown mother, loved the grown kid. And so it wasn't really about the laundry. The kid was upset. But I helped her walk through being like, hey, I love you. I want to spend time with you. Let's have dinner once a week together. We don't need to be bonded over your laundry. You are fully capable of doing your laundry. I don't not love you because I'm not doing your laundry. I would like to spend quality time with you rather than folding your shirts.
Earlier, when we were talking about the work boundary and not communicating, say, after a certain time, you started to touch on what if you're repeatedly stating that boundary and the person just isn't getting it and they're continuing to communicate with you in those hours that are outside your work hours. How do we go about handling that? And how does it escalate if, the situation just continues and continues?
It's really important what the power dynamic is in that relationship. If that happened and it was someone who worked for me, I would fire them without a doubt. If that happened 3 times after I had one conversation, you'd be gone, because that's ridiculous. If it's a boss, now you have a power differential. If my boss, when I used to work at a talent agency or wherever, was doing that, first of all, I would have to gingerly make that request and say, I'm really trying to get off tech on the weekends. And so I'd like to make a simple request that if it's not an emergency, can it wait until Monday or whatever? Because here's the thing, most of the time, especially these bosses who take advantage, they're not paying you to work on the weekends, right? But they're expecting you to. I would handle that much differently. And if after you made that simple request, and let's say the boss says, yeah, no problem, but they keep doing it, then you have to decide, am I ignoring? I've already warned them. I'm not checking my emails until Monday morning when I get up or whatever it is. It depends on how healthy or unhealthy that situation is. So if the person has power over you, how you establish the boundary is going to be different than if you have power over them or if you have equal power. So let's say you have equal power. Let's say it's I guess it could be a work example. It's someone you work with. If they continue, there has to be some kind of a consequence. So if Bob from accounting insists on video chatting me on the weekends, but I do not work for him, right? He's just someone in my office who likes to talk to me. I would then, if I've said it to him 4 times and he keeps doing it, or even 3 times, because wow, that's pretty ballsy, I would block his number. That is a consequence we must come up with. What is the consequence? And like with my sister, I would warn him, hey, Bob, I've made this request multiple times. You continue to FaceTime me on the weekends, and I don't appreciate it. And I've asked you not to. And if it happens again, I'm just going to block your number because you are violating my boundary. Bob might be like, oh, you're such a stick in the mud, or, and like not make it be a big deal, or might be like, why are you so dramatic? You don't have to respond to any of that, especially if it's Bob from accounting. You'd be like, that's how it is. How do you tell someone, like if you're in a work situation, this is another thing that's very common with boundaries at work, and it's hard, where, let's say Bob from accounting again is always commenting. I had this, I put this example in the book because it was a true client example. Someone who was really nice, old school, much older than my client, and thought he was doing her a favor by being like, wow, you look amazing today, Julia. Oh, I like that mini skirt, Julia. Oh, are you working out, Julia? Like continuing to objectify her, talk about her body in front of other people, make her super uncomfortable. And she's like, I know he does. I know he means well. I'm like, Julia, it doesn't matter what he means. How does it make you feel? She's like, terrible, objectified, embarrassed, violated. Like, oh, I hate it. I was like, okay. So in a really kind way, you can say, hey, Bob, I know that you mean all of these things as compliments to me, and you think that I should be happy and grateful that you're telling me how great I look. But I have to tell you, it honestly makes me uncomfortable. And I value our work relationship so much that I don't want it to come between us. But if you keep doing it, I feel like it's going to. So I just want to make a simple request that you stop making comments about my clothes or my body, please. Bob going to say, no, I insist I'm going to continue to objectify you. Maybe he'll be hurt, or maybe he'll say, wow, I didn't know. Thanks for telling me. But you can do it. There is language. It isn't like we have to be caustic or aggressive, but we also don't need to let Bob from accounting be violating our boundaries. It's not necessary. And when we do, we're prioritizing how that person feels, who's not even a VIP in your life, over how you feel, and it's negatively impacting how you feel about them.
Up until this point, Terry, we've been talking a lot about external boundaries and how we handle boundaries with others in our lives. Let's go internal and talk about setting our own boundaries and making sure we're accountable to ourselves.
Oh, so good. That's exactly what internal boundaries are. It's the way that we relate to ourselves. Do we keep our word to ourselves? Do we endlessly fall down on ourselves? How often do we abandon ourself and our best interest to save someone else, or because someone else wants you to do something? Perfect example of internal boundaries is my mother used to come over like on the weekends. She lives like an hour away, and she would say, okay, and she always gets up at like 4 a.m. So she'd be like, okay, I'll be there by 9. And I would say, in the beginning, I'd be like, Mom, I'll be home at 10:30. I have yoga, right? So it means I wouldn't be home until 10:30. So in the beginning, before I said anything to her, I'd complain to my husband, why does she got to come at 9? Like, and I would feel bad, right? I would skip yoga and kind of bitterly and begrudgingly be having coffee with my mother. And then I started being like, you know what? She does not know that I feel that way. And maybe she's not listening when I said that I wanted to go to yoga. But I said to her, I just started saying, hey, Mom, I'll be back at 10:30 because I do Saturday yoga. But feel free to come. Vic will be here. The door will be open. It's a beautiful day. And I can't wait to see you at 10:30. That was me having good internal boundaries instead of having disordered internal boundaries, like immediately giving up my preference to appease my mother when it isn't necessary. And she was fine. She was like, great, I'll be there. I'd come in, she'd be like sweeping my floor. Like, she wasn't mad. But I would have been mad if I continued skipping yoga to be there at 9 a.m. when she was going to be there.
And you could see over time that would just degrade the relationship. And even though you were appeasing her in the moment, it would not turn out good overall.
Yes, it has this um, ripple effect, and it's a ripple resentment effect where it just keeps going. This is the accumulation. Like, we have that file cabinet, resentment file cabinet, where you're like, this just goes under why my mother's selfish, right there, going right into that file, or why Bob in accounting's an idiot. There we go. That's going in that file. But those feelings of resentment, who's carrying them? Not Bob from accounting, not my mother, because they don't even know about them. We're carrying them. So we're not doing anything to the other person besides setting up the relationship we have with them to be fraught with conflict, even if it's only inside of you.
And would another internal boundary be somebody who continually shows up late to appointments, says they're going to go to the gym on Monday, ends up putting it off till the next week? Just trying to get different examples of where people may be violating these.
That's a perfect segue into all of these other ways of having disordered boundaries with ourselves. Yes, lateness. Yes, saying I'm going to stop doing this, or I'm going to start doing this and not doing it. I have a great example from my practice where during the pandemic, because a lot of people were drinking more and, doing whatever they were doing to numb their feelings more. And I had a client who I never had a drinking problem. And she was a client for a while, so I knew her history. And she came in and said, listen, I want you to help me be accountable. I don't want to drink during the week anymore. I've been drinking 3 big glasses of wine a night since, making an excuse for the pandemic. Like, I don't need to do that. I'm only going to drink on the weekends. And then for like 3 weeks running, she would come in I would see her on Wednesdays, and she would come in and be like, I'm so ashamed. I made it till Monday. I didn't drink Monday night, but I drank on Tuesday night. Like, I can't even make it to, and all of this focus on self-shaming and self-blame and just, I'm so bad. And what the hell's wrong with me? And maybe I'm an alcoholic. And then I brought up this concept that I didn't create secondary gain, but I created this tool for you to understand what's in it for you. Because listen, as human beings, what we're doing it for a reason. Like, there's nothing actually wrong with us. We are trying to avoid something else. So I said to her, all right, so what is the secondary gain? Secondary gain is the unobvious gain that you get for staying stuck in a situation, relationship, circumstance that you don't want to be in, or continually falling down on yourself. I'm going to stop drinking and not stopping. So I said to her, what do you get to not face, not feel, or not experience by continuing to say you want to quit drinking, but not, and drinking? And she sat and she said, I get to not face the state of my marriage. I was like, oh, well, instead of talking about what a jerk you are because you can't stop drinking during the week, why don't we talk about the state of your marriage? Because that is what's actually driving your behavior. And wouldn't you know, when we really started unpacking the state of her marriage, and she was not alone in having the pandemic shine a light on, all the cracks that already existed, her drinking. She did not drink during the week, and she ultimately did divorce her person. But, there's more going on. So when you say to yourself, I'm just lazy because I'm not doing that thing, you're not lazy. There's a reason you're doing or not doing that thing. And when you can reveal the secondary gain, and we can put that question itself in the show notes if you want, Jess, because it's actually a great tool for people to use for anything, any place that you're stuck in your life. You're doing it for a reason, and when you can reveal what that reason is, now you have a place to start.
This is really important. I'm glad we're really going into this because you could see how if somebody is having internal boundary issue. We'll use the drinking example. How if they're just saying, I'm going to muscle through, I'm going to build up the willpower, I'm not going to drink, maybe they will get through for a period of time. But I can see how if somebody is realizing there's a behavior in their life that they don't want to do, then this is the compass. The secondary gain thing is going to be, getting to the root and actually resolving the problem.
Yes. And then the behavior that has become compulsive will no longer be, because the thing that needs your attention, you have now given your attention to and either made changes or have a deeper understanding of yourself. And you don't need to numb in that same way, or you don't need to feel bad about yourself in that same way.
And again, we talked about extrapolating out earlier, I could see how if somebody is making these changes, getting to the root, it'll go beyond boundaries. It's going to affect, your confidence level, your relationships. This is going to getting to the root of these different things and these internal boundaries is going to just open up your world in so many ways.
Oh, yeah. And think about it this way: when you have good boundaries with yourself and with others, you are an emotionally trustworthy person. When you have disordered boundaries, when you say yes when you want to say no, you are not an emotionally trustworthy person. And all of us know our friends who are the people pleasers. I know. I still love them. When they say, I'm definitely going to be there on Saturday, I say to my husband, there's a 50% chance she's going to show up. That's cool. I accept it in some people if I get other value in that relationship, but people know it. So don't think that when you're a people pleaser that you're really fooling anyone, because the evidence is in your behavior. Because when we say yes, when we want to say no, a lot of times we then find a way to get out of that thing last minute. We get a migraine with quotes around it. We go with a crappy attitude. And like, who are we doing that for? All to avoid rejection, or all to avoid negative feedback. But then we're passively aggressively giving them our negative feedback. So it's not free, right? To have these disordered boundaries, it impacts how you feel about yourself, how other people feel about you. And you're right, your whole world shifts when you become someone that you can count on to tell the truth, right? And again, not every person in the world deserves your truth, right? It's not like we need to be spilling our guts to all the people, right? Having healthy emotional boundaries means that we know who we're sharing our deepest, darkest with, and we are developing intimacy with others over time as they reveal their trustworthiness, not like in one drunken night drinking tequila and telling someone like your worst childhood experiences, but a lot of times with disordered emotional boundaries, someone is seeking intimacy and instead they're falling into this insta, like revealing too much. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh my God, I have a boundaryless hangover. I'm so embarrassed. Why did I tell that person that? Or why did I reveal all of those things? Because it's not appropriate.
Something that popped up for me as you're explaining there is that this is inherently going to build deeper, more connected relationships because you're actually expressing your true essence instead of this mask that you're putting on without putting boundaries up. So it's going to make your relationships deeper and they're going to truly know and love you for who you are.
Absolutely. And Jesse, how can anybody authentically love us if we never allow them to authentically know us? We can't. And that's the biggest tragedy in all of this that I see with my clients is how lonely, like there's an existential loneliness that comes from feeling like nobody friggin' knows you.
And I can see how this whole thing too of not having boundaries and being, say, a yes person and just going with the flow on everything to try and please everybody else could be so emotionally draining, which is going to just drain your energy in general, and you're going to feel depleted all the time and relying on stimulants and I could just see how that would be impacted as well.
Absolutely, which of course affects your physical well being. I can't tell you how many people get in, by the time they get into my therapy office, they're like autoimmune disorders, TMJ. Like I could give you a list of the top stress induced physical manifestations of having disordered boundaries. And if you won't stop sooner or later, something will stop you. The universe will stop you. I really do think that physical stuff, physical ailments, a lot of times are directly connected to emotional um, discord.
What about somebody who has just let this go totally awry and say they're in their 40s or 50s and their external boundaries are kaput and so are their internal? And to begin this work, they're tuning in right now and they want to begin this work, but maybe they don't even know their true essence to begin from.
Hmm.
What does that work look like? Like, how do they figure that out?
Well, when we come to true essence, right? I have a a different, I think, mindset about it, or people are like, it's all about revealing your authentic self. No, I think that's part of it. And it's all about deciding who you're going to be in this world. And a lot of that requires changing your essence, right? I was naturally drawn towards addiction. Well, I could have kept going down that path and having the shit show of a life that would have created. Or I got sober when I was 21 because I saw that. So I feel like, first of all, if you are here and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. Here's the thing. How could you possibly know what nobody has ever taught you? Like literally, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just like a zillion other people in the world, and that's okay. And listen, you wouldn't feel bad about yourself if you weren't just fluent in a language nobody taught you because you really want to be. You would know, oh, this requires energy, effort, attention, intention, and you just start at the very beginning, which is doing that. First of all, go to boundarybossbook.com and get the book because I walk you through it no matter where you are. Trust me, you are in the exact right place to start this in your life. It's not too late. You're not too old. You're never too old to increase the quality of your life. It's a step-by-step journey. And you start with what is okay and what's not okay in your life. Do a relationship inventory. What relationships are fraught for you? Where do you feel like you are abandoning yourself? Who are you twisting yourself up and lighting yourself on fire for? Should you be? Are they VIPs? Are you not? Where are you not telling the truth? Where are you telling yourself lies? Like, oh, they just acted that way because they're so busy at work. I know they didn't mean it, so you could avoid setting a boundary. There's all kinds of tricky ways that our mind and our unconscious mind wants to protect us from what feels threatening. But when you start the book, you realize, or if you listen to it on tape, or if I have a podcast myself, I've got 500 free things on YouTube. Like there's a million ways. Listen, if you want to learn boundaries and you don't want to buy my book, trust me, go to my YouTube channel and it's all there for you. Or if you can't afford it, go to a library because I got them in a zillion libraries. Wherever you are is the right place to start. So looking at what is causing you pain in your life. When you do your downloaded boundary blueprint, which I walk you through in the book, you look at and start more deeply understanding why you relate to boundaries, specifically the way that you do. Because the way you do, Jesse, is different than the way that I do and everyone else. Because we all had different families of origin. We grew up in different countries and cultures, and we had a different role in the family system. And then you have our natural, like you have nature and nurture. Right? So who are you naturally? You might be an extrovert. Someone else is an introvert. All of those things come together to create this boundary blueprint. And most of the time it stays in your unconscious mind. And we just think, oh, this is the way the world is. This is how relationships are. This is what I need to do. Through the process of going into the basement, which is your unconscious mind, and bringing up all this information, you go, oh, this is just the way it was for my mother or my father or in my family system before me. Doesn't necessarily mean this is how it has to be for me. My mother was a people pleaser. It made sense. She was young at a different time than I was. I don't need to subscribe to that. I can be more authentic and be really discerning about who I care is pleased with me. It can't just be everybody. And then you make a change. But that self-knowledge, which is the second pillar of these 5 transformation pillars, is so important because then you can get away from self-judgment where you're like, what the heck is wrong with me? I must be weak. I must be stupid. Why am I always ending up in the same bad relationships or whatever it is you're thinking about yourself? When you see your downloaded blueprint, you go, how I am makes so much sense. Now, how do I want to be? And that is a decision you can make once you're not being driven by unconscious material that you are unaware of.
I could see how somebody tuning in right now could fear getting in and doing this work if they feel like their boundaries are totally awry. They've maybe been in a relationship and married for 20 years, been in a job for 20, 30 years, had these friends in their life since childhood. And it's like, you're somebody who's been at the other end of the table and working with people and seeing how when they get in and do this work, their lives can change.
Mhm.
How often do you see that their whole lives end up becoming uprooted, and relationships end and jobs end? And again, just somebody might be fearing that if they're going to go in and do this work.
Oh, I'd say it runs the gamut of experiences, but know this: you can be aware of something and choose to do nothing about it. Right? If it's a mindful choice and you go, you know what, we've been married 20 years. All right, it's not the best thing in the world, but I love our life. I love my house. I love my kids. I don't want to get divorced now. That's a choice, and there's nothing wrong with that choice. That can be your choice. But being in denial of those things, if you can make any mindful choice that you want. And I always say to my clients, hey, just because you now have more awareness that you're having this problem at work or your boundaries are disordered in your marriage, that does not require you to do something right now about it or to do anything drastic about it. Everything that I teach is very, very small steps, one at a time. We always take a break, step back. When you're in the beginning process of learning these things, the whole time someone's taking a boundary boot camp course with me, I'm like, hey, we're not changing anything until the 8 weeks is over. And even then, it's very small. When they're like, can't wait to confront this person and ball out that person. There's a new boundary sheriff in town, and I'm going to tell everybody all the things. I'm like, no, slow down. This is an internal, right? It's literally an inside job that we start with. And not knowing something doesn't make it not real. It just makes you in denial of what that is. And knowing that you are the boss of yourself. You don't have to do anything. And usually that will assuage some of that anxiety, like, oh my God, if I find out that there's any problems here, I have to leave. You don't. You never have to leave, as long as it's a mindful choice. So, yes, do many lives change when people become more able to create healthy boundaries? Yeah. But 99% of that change is towards a more authentic life. What you're feeling is real joy, real pain, real all the things, which is what being alive is really about, according to me, right? So I feel like expect that some things may change, and then you'll be shocked at how many people will be like, I'm so glad that you told me that. Or, not a problem, I will stop calling you after 7 p.m. I didn't realize. And even if people overly apologize, like, I'm so, so sorry, I'm always like, that is so, so unnecessary. I appreciate you respecting my boundary. What are you so sorry about when I hadn't even told you that prior to now? Again, it's people will react a particular way, and it's okay, right? This is a new way of being in your life, and you don't have to change everything overnight, and you won't, because it's a process.
That takes the pressure off. That's great. For the parents out there who have young kids who are still developing and they're aware of what we're talking about today now, either from your book or listening to us, how do they go about raising kids with healthy internal, we'll go separately on each of these, and external boundaries?
Well, the most profound and impactful way is by modeling behavior. So you can't tell a kid how to have good internal boundaries, or that they should, if you're a people pleaser and that you're always last on your own list. Because you know what part of that is going to get into their unconscious mind? What you actually do. That's what they see. So I always say to parents, you all want to focus on what am I doing for my kids? Do this for yourself. And then you are living your truth. And that is what they will grab a hold of and see. So, barring that, that's first step, according to me. Having conversations. Look at the way that you're parenting. Are you very strict? If a child says no, they don't want to do something, are you like, you better kiss old Aunt Betty either way? Like, are you Are you stepping over their physical boundaries, their emotional boundaries, because you're worried about what 99-year-old Aunt Betty with her whiskers is going to think about that? Or do you respect your kid has a right to be like, I don't want to? Don't. High five. I mean, listen, the pandemic has made all that way easier for lots of people. But why not just say, hey, how about just fist bump is what we're doing in my family? That's how we do it. Support your kid and being able to make age appropriate decisions for themselves, right? I'm not talking about letting a 3-year-old be like, I really want ice cream for dinner. Not that, obviously. But look at and be mindful, right? Learn what is age appropriate. Know the phases of childhood development because that is very helpful. When you have a teenager and they are being such a jerk, this is their mandate. They are separating and individuating from you. So if you crush them because of their rebellion, rather than understanding, oh, they need to do this to become who they need to become, you're not doing the right thing for them. Now, I'm not saying put up with crap, do not let them be disrespectful, but you got to stay the parent and be like, hey, lose that tone of voice. You're asking me for a favor. You want me to drive you to Billy's? But with that tone of voice, you can back it up and ask me again, and maybe I will. Keep in mind, I don't work for you. Like, you can have like a spirited conversation with a rebellious teenager without humiliating them or crushing their spirit. And all of that stuff has to do with boundaries. You can't take it personally. When you're a parent, you've got to be the grown-up all the time. And it's hard. You can't need your kid to approve of you. If you do, A, that's disordered emotional boundaries, but B, it gives a kid power that they don't even want. They're like 5 and they feel like they're driving the van of the family. They shouldn't be. They're only the passenger, strapped in the back. You're the grown-up. You're driving the van, you know?
And if you feel like they're old enough, do you feel it's appropriate, say they're in their teens, to have conversations like we're having today with them or share your book with them and actually explain what boundaries are and how they can go about navigating those in a healthy way?
Yeah, and actually, I think way younger than teen years is fine too. It's like saying, this is your physical boundary, is your body, right? That's the first thing, right? We don't want kids being vulnerable to predators. We tell them, you have the right to say no. If you don't like the way a friend, a grown up, anyone is touching your body, empowering kids to be able to say no and not teaching them so much that they have to respect adults to the point where they end up being vulnerable to people with bad intentions. So, appropriately, we can talk about boundaries at a younger age without burdening the kid. But yes, talking about it is great because it helps them be able to recognize boundary violations when they're happening in their life, when they're happening with friends or at school or someone else's parents.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Terry, earlier you talked about your mother was a people pleaser, and obviously that would have had some effect on you growing up as a young girl. Is part of doing this work as an adult to go back and look at how we were parented and how that influenced who we are today?
Absolutely. And in the book and the book is a book and kind of a workbook too. So I give you all these exercises. And one of those exercises is revealing your own downloaded boundary blueprint. And that's exactly what we do there is it's like was one or both of your I just call them, parental impactors because it could be an auntie, it could be a foster parent. It's really the adults in your life. It doesn't have to be biological parents. Were they people pleasers? Were they? So we start really getting a clearer view of what we witnessed. And we do it without making everybody wrong. Listen, we're just assume everyone did the best they could. Maybe they didn't. Who cares? We're talking about you now. And I would find that when people get into therapy, they feel very like loyalty, like, I don't want you thinking my mother is a bad person. I'm like, I don't. I think your mother is a human being and you don't need to protect them. This is what actually you saw. This is what you were taught, not with any malintent, but it's the truth. And we have to be able to get to that and not be endlessly protecting our parents, or we won't be able to get to our downloaded boundary blueprint successfully. And that's just a reaction in the beginning, and then once we get into it, people are like, "Oh, yeah, I'm just telling the truth. I'm not making them wrong or judging them, or maybe I am, but it's not about that. It's about what am I doing now? How did that impact me? And how do I want to be?" But we really do. I mean, I hate to say it all goes back to the scene of the crime, but it does, which is childhood.
When people begin to do this work and begin to look back at family, I wonder how often it goes beyond, a generation or two. And this is just, traveling down the family tree.
Hundreds of years. Think about how much people identify with their quote unquote tribe, right? Their family. How much I would have so many clients using language like, "Well, we're people that." I'm like, What? What are we talking about?" Like, and it's all about the family norms, right? Familial norms, and then you have cultural norms. But every family has their own way of relating to boundaries. Some family systems are very closed, where you couldn't have friends over, nobody slept over. Some family systems, mine was more open. Everybody came to my house, everybody slept over my house. So there was a lot of coming and going. But how your family system was, it really, really heavily impacts your downloaded boundary blueprint and the way you are relating to boundaries right now. I want you to think about that blueprint, your boundary blueprint, like an architectural blueprint for a house, but someone else designed it like decades or centuries ago. So it really is valuable to go, is this to my specs? Like, does this fit my life now? Is this the way I want to relate to boundaries? And if the answer is no, that's the beginning of identifying what we want to change.
Terry, we've covered a ton here. The book is Boundary Boss. We're going to link that up in the show notes. We're going to link everything up, your social media accounts. And I just thoroughly enjoyed this. This is going to be a lot of help for a lot of people. And getting your book will further facilitate people to really get in and do this work, which is just so important.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Me too. Thank you.